Have you guys noticed how certain old tropes are making a comeback? I mean, tropes are cyclic. They do come back after a period of time, usually in a new garb, just like fashion or an idea like socialism. But the tropes I'm noticing that are making a comeback are particularly interesting because back when they were the norm in like the 2000s or early 2010s, I thought I had a problem with them. For instance, the done to death boss secretary romance, like this 70s and 80s Mills and Boons trope that just would not die. And it's still really popular in spaces like anime, Korean manhwa, but at least on our television, it seemed to kind of die a slow death because K-drama land in general seemed to veer away from romanticizing class differences. They wanted to tell stories of people who were at more of an equal footing. And even if they weren't from the same kind of background, they would at least meet each other at a space where the socioeconomic differences was not the focus. And this gave us a pretty good run. We had a period between 2018 and 2021 where the major romance dramas that were coming out, and there actually were fewer romance dramas that were coming out, they all seemed to consciously veer away from the older tropes until, in my mind, 2022 when Business Proposal came out.
왼쪽이 사만다, 오른쪽이 레이첼이에요.
I think that was the first time in a while when we got that cracktastic viewing experience that kind of pulled us back to the time in early 2010s when you have this insufferable CEO paired with this zesty female lead, and she is just comedy gold and he keeps making a fool of himself around her. And their chemistry is great, but their social positions act as an interesting conflict. The difference between 2022 and 2012, though, was that Business Proposal was very self-aware. There was this real 2000s drama, I forget the name of it right now, that they made a fictional version of in Business Proposal, which was constantly running in the TV in the background. And, you had the CEO's grandpa watching, and you had the drama playing in the chicken store that was owned by the heroine's parents. And he was constantly seeing the parallels between the heroine of Business Proposal and the fictional woebegone heroine whose life was unfolding on the screen in the background. Like, both of them were daughters of fried chicken store owners, but you were also seeing the differences. The in-world drama character, Gumbi, is kind of a doormat. She just keeps getting insulted by the man's family. Everybody looks down on her. The man treats her horribly, and she just doesn't seem to have much self-worth. Whereas our heroine of Business Proposal, she has a really supportive family. She has a really good job, which she excels at, and she gets recognized for that in her company. The CEO in her world is kind of madly in love with her and treats her really well. And the CEO's grandpa is a darling. Like, not one person is throwing kimchi at her. So yeah, the drama was doing a lot of self-referencing with the meta drama playing in the background, but they were also clearly underlining the differences. And what that did was allowed us, the viewer, to enjoy the dynamic. The things that irked and bothered us 10 years before that were being lampshaded really cleverly. Lampshading is what you do in a story where you can see a problem in the story as the creator, and your audience is going to spot it too. So you kind of point it out yourself first, so that if the audience then talks about it, it kind of feels like, well, the show knows and the show is addressing it. And that's not always true. The show doesn't always address the problem. It's just a clever way of being like, well, we know, give us some time, like, trust us, we know what we're doing. In case of Business Proposal, it worked and didn't work. On the one hand, it made the vast socioeconomic difference between the couple much easier to swallow because the lampshading was very effective. The meta-referencing soothed us and made moments that could have been cringe hilarious and heartwarming. But then again, in the second half, the drama kind of does a self-fulfilling prophecy of sorts, where they kind of get trapped in the tropes. Because they created a heroine who does come from a humble background, she inevitably has a moment where she is comparing herself to her rich love interest. She's giving herself scores in comparison to him and coming up short, which ends up depressing her. And I hated that so much. And the other thing that happens is, because the heroine is basically engaged in a form of subterfuge, even though she gets found out relatively quickly, inevitably in the second half of the drama, she is just so bogged down with shame and self-recrimination that she becomes an extremely passive character. So we went from a very vibrant and funny female lead in the first half to one who just passively goes along with what the other characters in the drama want her to do in the second half. Like, she is portrayed in a really selfless way, which is infuriating. But also, unfortunately, it's exactly the kind of story shift that we are used to in dramas like this from a decade back. When you have a situation where the heroine comes from a much worse socioeconomic strata than the hero, and you don't give her a story arc where she grows to stand tall by herself, then inevitably she will be put in a position where she just has to be apologetic and ashamed and sorry to a lot of people, which really kills the momentum of her character. So no, the final half of Business Proposal was not fun, and it was absolutely because of the tropes used to create the dynamic of the main couple. You made him into somebody who solves all problems with money, and you made her into somebody who ultimately doesn't have much power in this fictional world. Their relative positions in the company meant that her livelihood was now in the hands of a man who could help her or hinder her or could absolutely devastate her. She was no longer in any form independent. This was kind of exactly the problem we ended up having in What's Up with Secretary Kim in 2018, because the male lead wanted to announce to the world that he was dating the female lead, and he never considered that this would put her directly at the center of a shitstorm of gossiping and rumor mongering within the company. The trajectory of the female lead in What's Wrong with Secretary Kim was that she wanted to leave the company. She wanted to retire, but because she started a relationship with this guy and he needed her, she ended up staying, even though despite all her years of hard work, the moment it got out that she was dating the CEO, people immediately started saying that she got her position by sleeping with him. Using an older trope is not the problem. It can be a lot of fun, especially for the part of the drama when you're punching up and you're making fun of the CEO and his privileges and his cute perspectives and calling him a dinosaur variant. Archaeorapt. But as soon as you come towards the second half of the drama where realism kicks in and you are going towards an ending where the two end up together, you are suddenly faced with choices in the story that are far too real for people. A middle-class woman working in a company does not want to be at the center of a scandal. She does not want to be in a situation where her employment can end any moment if her relationship goes sour with the CEO. There are real-world consequences to relationships like this that we don't want to think about while we are watching this stuff. We want the fantasy version where hopefully she goes off and works in a different company, or I don't know, starts a company of her own, or retires because she has worked enough, which was what Kim Biso had been trying to do for most of that drama. One of the things I really appreciated about Love Scout was the ending. And it's a more recent drama, so if you guys haven't watched this, skip to this timestamp. Are you gone? The male lead in Love Scout worked as the female lead secretary. And even after their relationship became public, which I, again, did not love how that happened, but regardless, even after that, he continued working as her secretary, and then the company went bust. whatever, the female lead recovers and she starts her own company. In any other drama, I would have expected the male lead to continue working for her. Even the male lead seemed to expect that. But she recognizes that his talents deserve a better position and that he would do better in a different company. So she helps him get that job. And so we end the drama in this honestly perfect situation where both of them have careers that, yes, they are kind of in the same industry, so it overlaps a little bit, but neither of them are subservient to the other. It's a drama that understood real world consequences, and they wanted to give us the fantasy version. They didn't want to give us the version where the male lead stays and keeps supporting her dreams, which is great. We love that. But they were also thinking about his trajectory. And in decades before that, his role, of course, would be played by a woman. And her dreams were usually subservient to his. Like, if they were working in the same company, the idea that she has to stay to support him was what the audience wanted to see. But I don't think people want that, or rather, I shouldn't say it. I see plenty of people who want that online. There were a lot of people who were complaining about Love Scout having the two separate work-wise. But I don't think it's a majority demand anymore. I think what a substantial number of us in the audience, we want the couple to have independent means of supporting themselves and staying together because they want to stay together. Another drama that did this is King the Land. Unexpectedly, it was that 2023, where the female lead ends up leaving the male lead's company and setting up her own bed and breakfast. See, I appreciated that because it would have been very easy to just keep her in the company because she was so competent, but her achievements would always get questioned. And you could see, especially in the second half, which was much stronger than the first half with this drama, that she was deeply uncomfortable with any insinuation that she wasn't achieving things on her own. So King the Land also used the boss-employee romance shtick, and that drama had a lot of flaws. I will not deny it. Like, you had the male lead basically abusing his position to spend more time with her repeatedly, even though it was clearly making her uncomfortable. And it didn't have anything to say at the end of the day. Which kind of brings me back to my point that the comeback of this kind of a trope, the boss-employee thing, it only works if you have something clever to say. Because otherwise it becomes a mimicry of what was popular 10, 12 years back, and not even entertaining mimicry. Like, the first half of Business Proposal was entertaining because of all the jokes we were getting that were referencing that older period of Dramaland. It was funny because they kept giving us situations that we were familiar with from those older dramas and then subverting things so that they didn't happen the way it happened in that drama. And then the show would be like, haha, we know what you expected because look, in the background we are playing that show about Gumbi where what you imagined would happen does happen to this poor character, but not to our heroine. It worked. But if you're going to use the boss-employee thing now in 2025, and a lot of storytellers seem to want to do that, you have my blessing. I will probably watch it. I still find that trope quite funny because it can create interesting dynamics, especially when unexpectedly the employee has more power in that dynamic. For instance, in This Is My 19th Life, my 19th life had a lot of problems, like a lot, so much. But that initial dynamic where you had this very young girl with like the wisdom of ages and she's approaching this slightly older man, he's in his 30s, as if she is older than him and doesn't seem to particularly care if she gets fired or not. Like, she's extremely confident. So it's something fresh, you find it entertaining. But then the writers don't seem to know what to do with it. Like, it doesn't go anywhere, it doesn't say anything. And ultimately, you have all of these characters who kind of get stuck in the trope. And the moment you're heading towards the exit point, the ending, you fall back into the pattern of, oh, she comes from a poor background, he comes from a rich background. Inevitably, all problems will be solved with money. The only agency she has is to like accept his confession or do a bit of noble self-sacrifice. And the story becomes drudgery. And the reason it becomes drudgery is because you're using this trope that pushes you towards this set pattern, and you didn't think things through, which is where I underline that they did think things through in Love Scout. I spent the entire video talking about just one trope, even though I had other things that I wanted to talk about. I'll just mention one thing before I wrap up, because I intended this video to be a short one. Tell me of other older tropes that you're noticing that are making a comeback. Something else that I noticed recently because of Dear Hongrang, which I'm looking forward to, is the Fauxcest trope. Now, Fauxcest never completely went away, but it kind of went in the background, where you occasionally had adopted brothers having unseemly feelings, like in Kill Me, Heal Me, for instance. And you had this trope cropping up a lot in Japanese and Chinese dramas and anime. I'm watching a lot of anime these days. But in K-drama land, with the main couple, you didn't really have that trope happening. That trope kind of died a gruesome death in the early 2010s. Like, it had an entire decade, probably a decade and a half before that, where it just wreaked havoc through the television sets of all of South Korea. But then it was time for it to die. And that was good, because that was around the time when I entered Dramaland, and I would not have survived that phase. I ended up watching a few of the more popular dramas. In almost all of them, regardless of whether they actually were related or not, one or both of them end up dying. Somehow not my favorite trope. However, I've only watched a few. There were dozens and dozens of dramas that had this trope at the time. And so when it died like a really definitive death. Nobody really wanted it to come out of the grave. So when I heard the plot of Dear Hongrang, there is literally no way these two are actually related, not with the way the promo material is showing us their dynamic. And also because this storyline reminds me so much of this 70s Bollywood movie, where this man comes to this rich family and pretends to be their long lost son, but had also fallen in love with the daughter of the family before he knew she was the daughter of the family. And so now the lovers have to get used to their new sibling dynamic, and it's very, very awkward. But yeah, Fauxcest is making a comeback, you guys. Also, I've watched started watching at least 2 Chinese dramas that have this trope. One of them is The Rise of Ning, which I don't know if I'll continue watching. It's not terribly interesting. But clearly the siblings are not siblings and romance is brewing. But I just started another C-drama called Serendipity, which has childhood friends who grow up kind of in love with each other. Like, she is more in love with him than vice versa. And he refuses to marry her. Then her family they die. And she loses her memory. And to kind of save and protect her, he pretends that she is his sister, so they can travel together and live together. And so he's slowly developing more feelings for her, but she's kind of cheesing him around, going all like, gaga. It is so awkward. But it's fun. Anyway, my conclusion at the end of the day is that I don't hate the tropes. I dislike the casual misogyny that these tropes were lathered in. I would not mind these tropes coming back so long as the women are still allowed to have brains and agency and independence. I don't think that's a lot to ask for. Anyway, so that was the video. Thank you for watching.